Here's an in-depth analysis of the challenges and negative implications of the two-party system. 1. Limited voter choice and reduced representation. A two-party system restricts political choice, often forcing voters to select between only two platforms that may not fully represent their values or preferences. This system oversimplifies complex political views, grouping them into broad categories, which reduces representation. Consequently, policies, especially economic ones, may not fully reflect the diversity of needs within the population. In many cases, critical issues may fall outside the agendas of the two major parties, leaving certain economic perspectives, such as progressive taxation or innovation in social welfare, unrepresented. 2. The polarizing nature of binary choices. The two-party system encourages a binary choice, which often results in extreme polarization. With both parties moving to opposite ends of the political spectrum, it becomes difficult to find common ground on issues like economic reform. As each party attempts to create a distinctive identity, they emphasize opposing views, often at the cost of middle ground solutions. For example, one party may focus on tax cuts as a means of economic growth, while the other emphasizes increased welfare spending, with little room for compromise. This polarization hampers constructive dialogue on comprehensive economic reforms and makes it difficult to implement policies that require consensus. 3. The winner-takes-all dynamic. The two-party system often operates under a winner-takes-all dynamic, where the party that wins a majority assumes control, effectively sidelining the opposition's perspectives. This structure leads to a focus on short-term victories rather than sustainable policies that benefit the economy in the long term. Economic policies like investments in infrastructure, job training, or long-term research funding may be dismissed if they don't align with the current ruling party's agenda. This focus on immediate gains discourages the development of policies that require extended implementation periods, leaving critical areas of the economy underdeveloped. 4. Short-term policy making driven by election cycles. Frequent election cycles compel politicians to prioritize policies that deliver immediate, visible results, often at the expense of long-term economic stability. Politicians are incentivized to pass legislation that can garner immediate public approval and bolster chances for re-election. As a result, they may favor policies like tax cuts, subsidies, or stimulus packages that yield short-term economic benefits. More complex and gradual reforms, such as those required for education, healthcare, or infrastructure, are often deferred, as their outcomes do not align with the short electoral timetable. 5. Partisan gridlock, legislative stalemates and economic stagnation. Partisan gridlock, common in two-party systems, creates significant obstacles to passing economic reforms. When the two parties are split in the legislature, they often struggle to reach agreements, resulting in a legislative stalemate. In the United States, for instance, critical policies such as those related to healthcare reform, infrastructure spending, and social welfare have faced delays due to gridlock. This stagnation means that economic issues persist, affecting job creation, infrastructure modernization, and essential social programs, and ultimately impacting citizens who would benefit from these initiatives. 6. Policy reversals with shifts in power. The two-party system often leads to frequent policy reversals when power changes hands, creating instability in economic policy. With each shift in control, there may be a strong tendency to undo or revise the previous administration's policies. In the context of economic policy, this can mean abrupt changes in tax laws, environmental regulations, and social spending. Such reversals disrupt continuity, creating uncertainty for businesses and individuals who must adjust to the new rules. For example, businesses may hesitate to invest in areas like renewable energy if they anticipate that subsidies or tax breaks will be removed in the future, slowing economic growth. 7. Populism over policy substance. Two-party systems often gravitate toward populist agendas, especially during election cycles. Politicians may focus on populist issues such as immigration or social values instead of substantive economic reform to rally voter support. This approach can lead to the neglect of critical economic issues, as politicians cater to popular sentiments rather than addressing more nuanced economic problems. Additionally, populist policies, such as protectionism or isolationism, may appear attractive to voters in the short term, but could harm the economy by reducing trade or increasing inflation. 8. Influence of special interest groups. With only two main parties, special interest groups can easily target political donations and lobbying efforts to influence policy. Economic policies may then be skewed in favor of those with resources to influence elections, often benefiting corporations and high net worth individuals. For example, tax laws and regulations may favor specific industries or corporations that have lobbied extensively to the detriment of broader economic reform. This influence undermines the two-party system's ability to implement fair and equitable economic policies that benefit the majority. 9. Business confidence and investment uncertainty. Frequent policy changes and reversals due to shifts in political power undermine business confidence, particularly in industries heavily regulated by the government, such as healthcare, energy and finance. Companies are hesitant to make long-term investments when economic policies are in flux, and this reluctance can hamper growth and job creation. Business leaders may avoid investing in infrastructure, research or hiring if they cannot predict the stability of regulations. This hesitation directly impacts the economy, slowing growth and stalling innovation in critical sectors. 10. Failure to address long-term economic issues. A two-party system often focuses on immediate wins, pushing long-term issues like climate change, healthcare reform, and infrastructure to the sidelines. Economic growth and resilience depend on addressing these issues, but short-term priorities often dominate. For example, investing in clean energy may require substantial funding and could yield long-term benefits. However, it may lack immediate appeal to voters. As a result, systemic issues are often ignored until they reach crisis levels, forcing governments to implement more costly emergency measures instead of proactive, cost-effective solutions. 11. Reduced political innovation. Two-party systems can stifle innovation in political and economic policy, as the competition is only between two established parties. Smaller parties or independent candidates who might introduce fresh ideas or innovative solutions to economic issues rarely gain traction in a two-party system. Policies such as universal basic income, extensive labor protections, or climate-focused economic incentives are often disregarded or dismissed. The lack of new ideas hampers the evolution of economic policy, leaving room for only conventional approaches, even as economies change and require novel solutions. 12. Increased voter disillusionment and decreased participation. The binary nature of two-party systems can lead to voter apathy and disillusionment, especially among those who feel unrepresented by either party. When voters feel that their choices are limited, they may disengage from the political process altogether, resulting in lower voter turnout. This lack of participation means that a significant portion of the population is left out of the democratic process, reducing the legitimacy of elected leaders. This disillusionment can be particularly harmful when it comes to economic policies, as disengaged voters are less likely to advocate for meaningful economic reforms. 13. Reactive rather than proactive economic policies. In a two-party system, economic policies are often reactionary, implemented in response to immediate political pressures rather than as part of a cohesive strategy. For example, economic stimulus measures or tax cuts may be introduced to gain favour with the electorate, without considering their long-term impact on the national deficit or income inequality. As a result, economic policies may prioritise short-term gains over sustainable growth. In contrast, a proactive approach to economic policy could address issues like healthcare reform or infrastructure improvements, which require a more strategic and forward-looking perspective. 14. The us versus them mentality. The two-party system fosters an us versus them mentality, which leads to adversarial rather than collaborative politics. This dynamic is particularly damaging when it comes to addressing economic issues, as cooperation and compromise are essential for sustainable solutions. Economic policies that require bipartisan support, such as trade agreements or social welfare reforms, often fall victim to partisan divisions. As each party seeks to establish its superiority, collaboration on long-term economic issues becomes increasingly rare, hindering progress on comprehensive reforms. 15. The cycle of economic neglect. As a result of these issues, two-party democracies often find themselves in a cycle of economic neglect, where pressing economic issues are consistently overlooked due to short-term political priorities. Issues like wealth inequality, educational disparities, and healthcare costs are often debated but rarely receive the attention needed for effective reform. Over time, these issues accumulate, creating structural weaknesses in the economy. As successive administrations continue to ignore these issues in favor of more immediate wins, economies may suffer from stagnation, decreased competitiveness, and a reduced standard of living. The two-party system in democracies, especially with frequent election cycles, can create substantial barriers to effective economic reform and improvement. Short-term policies, polarized agendas, and the influence of special interests often prevent the comprehensive, consistent attention needed for sustainable economic growth. In such a system, the focus remains on winning the next election, rather than implementing policies that could meaningfully improve the economy for future generations. A broader representation of voices, longer-term policy planning, and reduced influence of partisan interests would allow for a more stable and prosperous economic environment.